Welcome back to Adam versus the Man. Joining me in studio is Timothy Gagline, former special assistant to U.S. President George W. Bush and Deputy Director of the White House Office of Public Liaison from 2001 to 2008, where he helped establish the White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives. In January 2009, he became the top Washington, D.C. spokesman for Focus on the Family, an evangelical Christian organization dedicated to family and social responsibility and the outline of abortion in the United States. Also joining us from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is Logan Mailaturi, an Iraq War veteran who left the Army as a conscientious objector after deciding that he could not be directly responsible for the taking of human life because of his faith. He founded Centurions Guild, who, according to their website, quote, take very seriously the honor and dignity of our service members while also trying to be true to the higher allegiance we are called to as Christians. In that sense, we try to remember that God is ultimately greater than our country. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being with us tonight. Tim,
thank you.
We'll start with you since you're in studio here. Tell us about Focus on the Family, what your current legislative priorities are, and what it is that you're working on here in Washington.
You bet. Well, Focus on the Family was founded in the mid-1970s. It was founded by a man called Dr. James Dobson, who in fact had intended to spend most of his professional life quite apart from public policy. He was a child psychologist, and in the midst of what was then the bubbling sexual revolution, he found that in many quarters it was considered bad manners to discipline your children. To say that you were going to commit to one person for the rest of your life in a happy marriage. That in fact you thought that the nuclear family was the foundation of a strong country and the strong civilization. These were considered fighting words in the height of the sexual revolution. And so Focus on the Family put marriage, family, and parenting...
Just to clarify, the backlash that you're referring to was cultural backlash.
It was very much so, yes, yes, you know, very much so. And so Dr. Dobson put family, marriage, and parenting at the centerpiece. The overwhelming majority of what Focus on the Family does is ministerial. It's one of the leaders in the country on orphan care, foster care, adoption, pro-life, etc. Focus on the Family has the top Christian radio broadcast, both in the United States and abroad. We're heard in about 134 countries every day by about 260 million plus listeners a week.
So with all that, what are you doing in Washington?
Washington is the most powerful city on the planet. And in fact, Washington preoccupies itself with issues that impact family, marriage, and parenting every day. It does so politically, it does so in the public policy process, it does so in the courts, it does so in think tanks, it does so in the media, it does so in K Street and special interests. And it's our job at Focus on the Family to be mindful about the things that our ministry is built on.
So do you think those involvements that you mentioned with government on issues that are religious issues for Focus on the Family are appropriate roles of government?
You know,
or are you working for less involvement overall?
Right. May just say, I am a person who has spent most of my professional life in and around the Beltway. But I believe very strongly that politics is actually downstream from culture and not the other way around. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a great liberal and a great Democrat, once made a very important observation. He said the principal difference between liberals and conservatives is that liberals believe that if you want to impact culture, change politics first.
Okay, well,
but he said the opposite is true of conservatives, that if you want to impact politics, impact culture first. I think he was right.
Okay, well, Logan, turning to you from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, tell us about getting out of the Army as a conscientious objector, how your faith influenced that decision for you.
Sure. Well, I had deployed to Iraq in 2004. I came back and I began dating a woman whose family showed me what it was to be a Christian beyond just reading the Bible and letting it sit at that. So I learned to live my faith a little bit more genuinely, and that led me to wonder whether or not, as a forward observer with the artillery, whether or not I could perform that professional obligation and also call myself a Christian that I felt was called to nonviolence. The problem came when I found that nonviolence was something that I was called to as a Christian, but some of the Christian left that I was in touch with also felt that the military itself was a problem, that I should remove myself from it. But I'd been in over 5 years. I had great respect for the other men and women that I served with, and I didn't want to see those relationships severed. And so I requested from my unit to be a non-combatant conscience objector, which is not always done, but they did work with me as best they could. But ultimately, when it came down to it, they did not allow me to deploy without a weapon as I requested.
So you tried to stay in as a conscientious objector, and they said, no, you're going to get out as a conscientious objector.
That's correct. Go ahead.
So how does that lead to founding the Centurions Guild?
As I was getting out, my command did not want to discuss the process. It can be ideologically and emotionally provocative, especially because we were leading into a second deployment. And so I lost a lot of the relationships that I hoped to maintain. And in the meantime, I began getting to know a new group of people that were very active in the church, very active in social justice. And we began having conversations about what it means to be, an American citizen and be a Christian at the same time. And we became very exhausted with the caricatures that went along with that. The military is all bad, or America is God's, hand of judgment in the Middle East. And so we in January of 2008, we formed just a small community of mostly men. I don't think we have any women yet. Christian men who tried to take seriously the obligations of citizenship, but also recognize that God ultimately is greater than the U.S. and sometimes that calls us to obey God rather than men. But at the same time, it didn't lead any of us to say that there's one way in which to obey God rather than men. And so some of us went on to deploy to Iraq. Some of us, like myself, applied for CO. And we have a pretty wide diversity with a relatively small group of people trying to minister to other service members and veterans who wrestle with the dichotomy between faith and service.
Now, Tim, you do, as Focus on the Family, you do a lot of advocacy, and as it's very clear from your website, a lot of help for couples that are looking to start families, counseling for people who are in the military, even if
Yes,
just online.
Yes.
And as I'm sure you're aware, in the military, we have one of the populations with the highest rate of all sorts of family problems, divorce,
yes.
Spouses being deployed, you have child abuse, issues with post-traumatic stress disorder, troops coming home.
Right.
How do you think that in that ministry to people who are dealing with those kind of military issues, do you find times where, as Logan points out, sometimes service to God conflicts with service to country?
May I just say, I'm actually really pleased to hear you ask these questions because, and I know your program spends a lot of time looking at the great external and security threats to the United States, the remarkable domestic fiscal road to insolvency, which we just heard about. But the issues that we're talking about actually, in many ways, are the most important ones for the future of the United States of America, the social and moral decay that we have seen, and principally among the families that you're asking about. Nowhere more so than in the American military family, with long and multiple...
Would you say that those symptoms that I point out within the military
yes.
are products of that moral decay?
The answer is that...
Because you would be saying then that the moral decay is worse in the military than it is in the general population.
No, here's what I would say. I would say the United States of America is a country today where 40% of all marriages end in divorce. 75% of all second marriages end in divorce. 40% of all children in America are born out of wedlock. I would say that that is a sign of social and moral decay in an otherwise remarkable country. And what I'm saying is that the impact on our American military families is extremely serious. Multiple deployments.
Well, part of what you're pushing with Focus on the Family is for people to start families.
My friend, let me finish my point for a moment. What I am saying is that we at Focus on the Family hear from American military families all the time, daily. We hear about the incredible stresses that are placed on marriages with regard to multiple deployments. We hear about all the social and military stresses that are experienced by American military families. So I concur that the stresses and pressures are enormous and they are real.
And so what's the Focus on the Family approach to that?
And so the Focus on the Family approach is to minister to those families as we have always ministered to all American families who are experiencing crises of these natures. And may I say, this is the heart of Focus on the Family. We are one of the best resources anywhere in the United States. And we have a website that is family-friendly to
Well,
military families and others who are experiencing this kind of duress.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes.
Logan, having experienced some of this firsthand, having dealt with deployed units, having deployed yourself, seen other service members go through the kind of family stresses that you've seen in the military, do you think the focus on the family approach is appropriate? Or do you think it's helpful to soldiers facing those challenges?
I'm not familiar enough with focus on the family's approach. I do think that one of the things that we need to be prepared to do as a church is to question war, not in an overtly critical manner, but to take it seriously enough to question whether or not each and every instance is appropriate. Part of the problem with the repeated deployments and more intense combat experience for the individual combat soldier is what it brings back to the family. All the statistics that you mentioned, I believe, are heightened for military members. The suicide rate is the highest it's ever been recorded in our history. For 7 months in 2009, there were more soldier suicides than there were combat fatalities in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. So part of it is not just ministering upon return, but preparing soldiers to go do the heavy moral work that they're asked to do in the stead of the 99% of the American population that does not perform that duty.
So Logan, excuse me, if you had kids today, would you advise them to join the military? Would you be encouraging children, if they were of age, to be enlisted in the U.S. military?
So I've been dissatisfied with some of the terminology that's thrown around the left about counter-recruitment. I think it's relatively unproductive. I think that recruitment counseling is a more appropriate approach, wherein you trust that a child of 17, 18 years old is able to make informed decisions if they have the tools to do so. And so what I would advocate for if I had children was to share with them my experience, to share with them the positive stuff that they're going to get from recruiters, but also share with them the very real emotional, social repercussions of serving in combat that recruiters and military individuals are often very reluctant to share with. I think we need to be honest about what moral and social implications are in store for those that fight for us. And too often we avoid the question because it's uncomfortable, because it's volatile. But I think conversations really need to occur. And I think that, that military members and children considering military are worthy of that respect.
All right, just a second left here, Tim.
Yes.
What's your advice, parents who have children considering joining the military?
Well, I would say this. I'm a father of two boys, 15 and 12. I am not a veteran, but my father is. He's a naval veteran. And I would very strongly recommend that either one of my boys or other young boys or young girls, soon to be young men and young women, that they do, in fact, consider the military, if not for a career and a lifetime or in a profession.
I'm sorry, Tim, that's all the time we have left, but I really appreciate you and appreciate you coming on the show. Logan from Philadelphia, appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. That was Logan Laturi, Executive Officer at Centurions Guild and U.S. Army veteran, and Tim Gagline, Vice President of Focus on the Family.